Hello, my name is Ray Dorcey. I'm a neurologist at the University of Rochester, and along with my colleagues, have written a new book called Ending Parkinson's Disease. In it, we highlight that Parkinson's disease is the world's fastest growing brain disease, even faster than Alzheimer's disease. And we argue in the book that Parkinson's disease is largely a man-made condition. To the extent it is a man-made condition because of pesticides, air pollution, industrial chemicals, and heavy metals, it can be a human-ended condition. And what I want to challenge you today is to think about how we collectively can work to prevent and end Parkinson's disease, not only for this generation, but for all subsequent generations. With that, I'm going to give you a brief presentation, and then hopefully at some point in time, I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have and tell you a little bit about how this is affecting even people in Syracuse. So as an outline of the talk, I'm going to talk to you that we live in the age of degenerative and man-made diseases. And lest people get confused about man-made diseases, they're all around us. You know, everything from car accidents to homicides to suicides to type 2 diabetes to many cancers, including lung cancer, to large portions of Parkinson's disease are all man-made. Man-made. And now I'm going to talk to you about the rise of Parkinson's disease, how it grew from a very rare disorder to the world's fastest growing brain disease, and then talk, most importantly, how we can end Parkinson's disease together, and finally end with some acknowledgments and tell you a little bit more about how you can get the book. So the French-American scientist René Dubos in 1959 wrote this. He says, every civilization has its own kind of pestilence and can control it only by reforming itself. In essence, every society creates its own diseases. And we create our own diseases every day by the chemicals that we use, the chemicals that pollute us and that affect the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink. And I'm going to show you concrete examples of that. Before I do, though, I want to talk to you about this really cool epidemiologist, Abdul Omran, who in 1971 wrote this paper. And he highlighted what are the 4 different eras and what are the of humanity since our existence 200,000 years ago, and what were the principal causes of death during each one of those eras. And so he said the earliest humans died from pestilence and famine. Quite simply, there was not enough food. And about 10,000 years ago, we had the agrarian revolution, which gave us lots of food and enabled the production of cities. But we had receding, largely infectious pandemics. So that's the bubonic plague in the 1400s and the influenza pandemic in the 1918. Now, he says we live in the age of degenerative and man-made diseases. Among those I'm going to argue to you is Parkinson's disease, which to a large extent is man-made, but lung cancer, car accidents, and many others, obesity, are man-made, to a large extent, man-made diseases that we can stop. And then he said in the future, we're going to die of delayed degenerative diseases and emerging infections born out of hubris. And if you want a good example of that, it's COVID-19. It looks like, we don't know for certain, that COVID-19, a number of these other influenza viruses are contributed to by poor animal husbandry practices. If we reform ourselves, if we reform our society, we can help bring about the end of these diseases and stop contributing to our own demise. So the poster child for man-made disease is lung cancer. So if you look closely at this graph and you look at lung cancer deaths in the United States in the early 1920s, there was essentially almost no lung cancer. Lung cancer, quite simply, did not exist. Indeed, people said before the advent of cigarettes, doctors took a special notice when confronted with a case because they thought lung cancer was on a once-in-a-lifetime oddity. A once-in-a-lifetime oddity. You would never see it again. But we did, because we started smoking cigarettes, first in England and then the United States. In the 1900s, you can see this rise in the rise in number of cigarettes smoked. And 25 years later, you can see a rise in the number of lung cancer deaths. By contrast, one of the great public health accomplishments over the last 20 to 50 years has been a decline in smoking. And that decline in smoking has been associated with a corresponding decrease in lung cancer deaths. So this model of environmental exposure early in life leading to disease later in life, early exposure to cigarette smoking later in life, lung cancer is a model that we're going to use when we think about Parkinson's disease as well. Just remember that lung cancer almost didn't exist in the United States before we started smoking. So what does this have to do with Parkinson's disease? Well, Parkinson's disease, before Dr. James Parkinson described it in 1817 in London, quite simply was extremely rare. It was almost a once in a lifetime oddity. There are very, 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 very few ancient reports of what appears to be Parkinson's disease from Chinese, Greek, Indian, and Egyptian texts. But really the major description of Parkinson's disease had to wait until 1817 and Dr. James Parkinson. So who is this guy, Dr. James Parkinson? Well, Dr. Parkinson in 1817 was a 61-year-old doctor who'd been practicing medicine for about 30 years. And so he was an experienced clinician. His father was actually a doctor as well. And when he described the people that he characterized 6 people with Parkinson's disease, he said, I'm describing something that's not been classified in the medical literature before. He's describing something that's not been classified in the medical literature before. He's describing something new. And if you're 61 and you're a doctor, been around for 30 years, you know, you're not going to pick up your pen about any run-of-the-mill condition. You're going to be picking up your pen to describe something that's new or novel. And that's indeed what Parkinson's disease was to Dr. Parkinson in 1817. It got its name, Parkinson's disease, not from Dr. Parkinson, who called it a shaking palsy, but from the French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, who named it after him in 1872. In 1912, a German pathologist identified the pathological hallmark of Parkinson's disease, which is this misfolded protein called alpha-synuclein, which makes up these Lewy bodies, which are found in nerve cells in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease. In the 1950s, researchers found in Sweden that individuals with Parkinson's disease had lower levels of dopamine in their brain. In the 1960s, that led to the development of levodopa, which is just a precursor. It's converted to dopamine in the brain and is still the most effective treatment for Parkinson's disease. In the 1980s, we identified the first environmental causes of Parkinson's disease, a contaminant in the street formulation of heroin that caused acute Parkinsonian symptoms in young adults in their 20s and 30s in the Bay Area. In the 1990s, we found the first genetic causes of Parkinson's disease. 2003, a really cool German pathologist who's still living, Dr. Heiko Brock, put forth the hypothesis that Parkinson's disease does not begin in the brain. Parkinson's disease does not begin in the brain, but in many cases, Parkinson's disease begins either in the gut, which is affected by pesticides and industrial chemicals through the food we eat and the water we drink, or in the nose through pesticides that we inhale if you work in a farming community, or from industrial chemicals that you might be exposed to at work, or from air pollution, either outdoor air pollution or indoor air pollution. We're going to talk about that in more detail. And then in 2017, 200 years after Dr. Parkinson described what was a very rare condition, he only described 6 people. Parkinson's disease went from 6 people in 1817 to the world's fastest growing brain disease in the span of 200 years. If something like that happened from 200 years, it's not because of genetics, so our genetics doesn't change over the span of 200 years, or not very much, the span of 200 years. It has to be something that environmental, something that we're doing to ourselves to let something go from affecting 6 individuals in 1817 to being the world's fastest growing brain disease, affecting being disease. 200 Americans today will be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and 100 will die from the condition. So what was going on with Dr. Parkinson in 1817 in London? Well, it's the height of the Industrial Revolution in 1817, and England's the capital. And the London fog had little to do with weather and everything to do with air pollution. You couldn't even see across the street. As this picture depicts, the air pollution was burning. You can see the husband and the wife covering their mouths because of the toxic effects of air pollution. And you can see the need for boys to carry flames so that people could walk the streets of London. And indeed, since that time, numerous studies have linked different products and byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, including air pollution, heavy metals, certain pesticides, and industrial chemicals like trichloroethylene, TCE, to Parkinson's disease. Numerous studies have linked these environmental risk factors to Parkinson's disease by numerous investigators from around the world. And now Parkinson's disease is the world's fastest growing brain disease. Over the last 25 years, the number of people with Parkinson's disease worldwide has more than doubled to over 6 million. If we don't act, if we continue to allow these environmental products and byproducts to spread throughout the United States and throughout the rest of the world, the number of people with Parkinson's disease will double in the coming generation, and that will be on us because we have the information to act and prevent and end Parkinson's disease today. We need to take steps right now to prevent Parkinson's disease from doubling over the coming 25 years. As I mentioned, that German pathologist, Dr. Heiko Brock, pointed out that Parkinson's disease might, for many individuals, might begin in the gut or in the nose. And indeed, the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease, as many of you know, is not tremor and it's not slowness of movement, it's not thinking difficulties. The earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease are loss of smell, the fancy term is anosmia, and constipation. And so those symptoms develop years, if not decades, before the tremor and the slowness of movement develop in Parkinson's disease. And that might reflect that the initial pathological, the initial injury is occurring in the nose and the gut before it makes its way to the brain or the parts of the brain that affect movement. So what are some of these environmental risk factors? So I mentioned air pollution, and so this is just a graph of an air pollutant. It's not likely the air pollutant that's responsible for Parkinson's disease, but just an example of air pollution in general. Well, where did air pollution first begin? It first began with the Industrial Revolution. Air pollution simply didn't exist before the Industrial Revolution. You can see the levels of air pollution were negligible before 1850, and it first began in England and Western Europe, and then it migrated to North America, and then to Asia, and then to Africa. And if you look at the rates of Parkinson's disease, they're highest in North America and in Western Europe. They are lowest in sub-Saharan Africa, and they're growing the most rapidly in Asia, where industrialization is occurring most rapidly. So the areas, the rates of Parkinson's disease are highest in the most industrialized parts of the world, lowest in the least industrialized parts of the world, and increasing most rapidly in the most rapidly industrializing parts of the world. Other things that are linked to Parkinson's disease are pesticides. Pesticides are nerve toxins. Some are naturally produced by insects to prevent themselves from getting eaten, or by plants to prevent themselves from getting eaten by insects, I'm sorry. And some are produced by humans. And human synthetic pesticides were really introduced in the 1950s. Many pesticides are simply nerve toxins. Many of them are fat soluble. Your brain's a fatty substance. The remnants of some of these pesticides have been found in the individuals with Parkinson's disease. We detail that all in our book in Ending Parkinson's Disease. These pesticides target the parts of cells that we know are damaged in Parkinson's disease. And when you feed these pesticides to animals, to mice, and to rats, they develop the clinical and pathological features of Parkinson's disease. You can't get much better evidence. Yet, we continue to use these pesticides. So paraquat was developed in the 1950s as a pesticide. It's considered the most toxic herbicide ever created. It kills the weeds that Roundup can't. And it's been used to commit homicide. It's been used to commit suicide. And 32 countries, including China, have banned this pesticide. However, the United States has not. And in fact, over the last 10 years, not only has the United States not banned paraquat, use of the pesticide has doubled in the United States. Use of paraquat in the United States, according to the U.S. Geological Service, has doubled over the past 10 years, and we have failed to ban it. And you can see where it's being used on this map, and it's being used in Western New York and in the farms around Syracuse and around the farms around Rochester, where I live. We put in the book black pages toward the end that are a prescription for action. And the first prescription for action that we highlight in the book is to ban paraquat. And if you want to ban paraquat, we give you the email address and the phone number for the EPA administrator, and you can call him or email him and ask him to ban paraquat because you're tired of paraquat contributing to the rise of Parkinson's disease. Numerous studies have linked paraquat to Parkinson's disease. Certain pesticides increase the risk of Parkinson's disease between 50 to 150% in studies done in the United States, and studies done in Canada, and studies done in France. Another chemical is trichloroethylene. Trichloroethylene, or TCE, was ubiquitous in the 1970s in the United States, found in whiteout, used to decaffeinate coffee, even previously used as an anesthetic until the FDA deemed it no longer safe to do so. Still been widely used in dry cleaning. It's an awesome degreaser, so it's been used in degreasing if you worked as a mechanic, if you worked in industrial settings, oil processors, printers, you were likely exposed to trichloroethylene. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt from our book talking about trichloroethylene. So this is from chapter 5, and it's called Cleaning Up: How Solvents and Contaminated Groundwater Spread the Disease. And it begins with a quote from retired Master Sergeant Jerry Ansminger, who says, "The benefit of the doubt should go to the people, not the chemical." In 1988, Danny Fromm, I'll show you a picture. Danny Fromm was a typical Southern California teenager who enjoyed working on cars, especially his red 1972 Chevy Nova with a black top. He paid $1,300 for it, money he had saved from working as a gas station attendant at the local Unocal 76. Fromm and his buddies replaced the car's engine, which made it really awesome and really fast, he recalled. The car gave the 17-year-old the freedom that he craved, freedom to do what he wanted when he wanted, freedom that he no longer has. Straight out of high school, Fromm began working in the aerospace industry, cleaning circuit boards with the solvent trichloroethylene, TCE. Never warned of any risk or provided with protective gear, he inhaled the sweet-smelling chemical and exposed his skin to it for 8 hours a day over the course of a decade. When Fromm was 35, he noticed that his right pinky kept twitching. Stress, his first doctor said, and recommended a little wine. His second doctor gave him a much different diagnosis: Parkinson's disease. Fromm later started levodopa, improved his symptoms, and developed some complications from levodopa and had deep brain stimulation. Fromm is now 48 years old, I'll show you a picture of him now, and lives in Idaho with his wife and 6-year-old son, Logan. He has 2 older sons who live nearby with their mother. In the morning, Fromm has trouble walking. He has what he calls a hardcore shuffle. So he takes his medication immediately after he wakes up, and he does leg exercises to relieve his leg stiffness. He's then able to get out of bed, shower, and dress without assistance. Each morning he makes Logan's lunch and takes him to school. By the time Logan comes home, Fromm's shuffling has usually returned. Sometimes he feels embarrassed for himself and for his son. Some days are better than others, though. On a good day, he can play with Logan, mow the lawn, and even walk on trails near his home. But Fromm says the effects of his medications are hit or miss. Many days his mobility is severely limited. He and his son spend a lot of time together. Occasionally, Logan will mimic Fromm's walk, even his shuffle, in a good-natured way. His son rarely speaks of the disease, though. Fromm says, "I better have a good relationship with Logan. He's going to take care of me when I'm older." Fromm regrets every day that he stayed at his aerospace job, working with trichloroethylene, sometimes called tri or trike. While the solvent has not been proven definitively to cause Parkinson's, those who are exposed to it at work are 6 times more likely to develop the disease than those who are not. If you're working with it, Fromm says, quit your damn job and get away from it. And so that's the story of trichloroethylene from Southern California. Unless you think it's just in Southern California, you're wrong. In fact, TCE contaminates over half of Superfund sites throughout the United States, including Superfund sites in upstate New York and numerous in California. TCA was often, or still often, stored in these large vats and often disposed of inappropriately. Simply, it's poured into the ground where it seeps down into the soil and then contaminates the groundwater and forms underground plumes that migrate from contaminated sites. And then TCA can be evaporated from these underground plumes into people's homes or contaminate groundwater. Up to 30% of groundwater in the United States is estimated to be contaminated with trichloroethylene. So this is how it's disposed of. Inappropriately contaminates the groundwater, migrates with the groundwater underground, and then can evaporate. The fancy term is vapor intrusion into people's homes undetected. So people can be breathing in TCE in their indoor air, like their house, and be leading to increasing their risk of Parkinson's disease and their risk of cancer, because TCE is a class 1 carcinogen, and a carcinogen by all routes of exposure. It causes cancer. I found in the process of writing this book that there was a site 15 minutes from my house. I live in the suburbs of Rochester, New York, on a quaint, cul-de-sac. And there's a TCE contaminated site 15 minutes from my house, in which people at a gravel site inappropriately disposed of TCE, and that went under, contaminated the groundwater and affected this entire area in Victor, New York, including the water source for the area, which was the spring, leading to people to be drinking contaminated water with high levels of TCE, or potentially being exposed to TCE as it evaporates into their home. In our book, we describe the story of someone who lives in that neighborhood every day, would run up a hill in the neighborhood, and one day could no longer run up the hill, and was subsequently found to have Parkinson's disease. There are plenty of other sites. There are 21 sites in Silicon Valley that are contaminated with TCE. There are sites in Michigan. There are sites in Las Vegas. And in preparation for this presentation, there are sites near people in Syracuse. So let me see if I can show you my screen here. So, and I'd love to hear from you if you've been affected by this. Hopefully you can see this life in the plume. So this is from just from Syracuse.com. Life in the Plume, IBM's pollution haunts a village, written in 2019, updated in 2019, initially written in 2009. And the village that they're talking about is Endicott, New York, where IBM had a manufacturing plant that used TCE. And we'll see if we can get, and this is a map of the affected area with TCE in Endicott, New York. There are lots of websites, and again, I just went onto Google. I can show you another source. This is talking about that vapor intrusion where the soil is contaminated, then the groundwater is contaminated, and the TCE evaporates into people's homes. Homes essentially have like a negative pressure relative to the ground underneath and brings in the TCE. You can even see this this picture. I don't know if it'll show up. Yeah. IBM's toxic plume pointing to the building in Endicott that was responsible for this contamination. There's a good website called from the Center for Public Environmental Oversight, talked about in the book, Lenny Siegel, who used to be the mayor of Mountain View and has really made it his burning passion to categorize and detail all of these affected sites, including the Endicott site not too far from many of you. If any of you were affected by this or know of additional information, we're learning. I'm learning just as much as people are from the book. So if you know stories, I'd love to hear from you. You can just email us at info@endingpd.org, info@endingpd.org. I'd love to hear from you. Now with that, I'll return to our presentation. We've talked about TCE contaminating over half of Superfund sites in the United States, thousands of other sites, including one 15 minutes from my house, and one, I think, 40 or 50 miles from many of you in Syracuse. My suspicion is some of you are worked at or lived near Endicott, and I'd love to hear from you. info@endingpd.org. Tell me your story, and hopefully we can work to help prevent other people from being affected by these chemicals. So this is Jane Horton. She lives across the street from the current headquarters of Google in Silicon Valley in Mountain View, California. And the current headquarters of Google is built on former site used by Fairchild Semiconductor and Intel. And those two companies use TCE to clean silicon wafers, just like IBM used TCE to clean circuit boards. These companies use it to clean silicon wafers. And there's a Superfund site across the street from her house. So she found out, and what she do is she had her indoor air tested, and we tell you exactly how to do that in the book. You can go to the EPA's website on vapor intrusion, epa.gov/vapor intrusion, all in the book. And she had her indoor air tested, and it had high levels of TCE in her indoor air. She learned about the adverse effects of TCE exposure, including Parkinson's disease and cancer. And she had her house, in her words, cut, butchered, and vented, and had a TCE remediation system put in her house. So the nice thing about TCE is that it's treatable in terms of lowering the levels. So you put this remediation system in your house, which is right next to her utility box, and it takes air from underneath her house, sucks out the air, and then emits it above her house, so it avoids her house. She now has her indoor air regularly tested, and says that she has the cleanest air in all of Mountain View, California. So what can we do to end Parkinson's disease? So to the extent that it's man-made, we should be able to end it as humans. So we need to develop a pact, P-A-C-T, to end Parkinson's disease. The first element of that pact is prevention. So we need to ban paraquat and trichloroethylene. In addition, there are things you can do that will lower your risk of ever developing Parkinson's disease and be quite beneficial even if you have the disease. So vigorous exercise decreases your risk of developing Parkinson's disease by about 20% and is very helpful for people with Parkinson's disease. Yoga, Tai Chi, bicycling, running, stretching, swimming are all very good exercises. The little exercises, to the extent you can, that make you sweat a little bit. Eating well, a Mediterranean diet, low in animal products, high in fruits and vegetables that you'll wash with the water, and a little bit of soap that you can get from Trader Joe's or wherever you'd like to get it that can remove any pesticides that are on that food. A Mediterranean diet can be helpful in preventing Parkinson's disease, or may be helpful in preventing Parkinson's, and may be beneficial for those with the disease. And a little bit of caffeine, the equivalent of 1 to 4 cups of caffeinated coffee or whatever your caffeinated beverage or food of choice is, may decrease your risk of ever developing Parkinson's disease and may be beneficial for those with the disease. Of course, all of you know where to wear a helmet and protect yourself from head trauma. Second element of the pact is A, for advocate. We need to advocate for more resources to address Parkinson's disease, both to prevent the disease and to develop new treatments for the disease. At the same time, the number of Americans with Parkinson's disease has increased by 35% over the last 10 years. NIH funding adjusted for inflation has actually decreased. Same time, the number of people with Parkinson's disease has increased 35%. NIH funding adjusted for inflation for Parkinson's disease has decreased. For HIV activists, adopted the motto of silence equals death in the 1980s, because for them, if they were silent, they were going to die. And for Parkinson's disease, silence equals suffering, needless suffering, preventable suffering. And we now, as a society, spend $3 billion a year on HIV research, and that has led to improved treatments and ways of preventing the disease that have prevented thousands, if not millions of us and our friends and families from ever developing HIV because of the work of HIV activists. We spend less than 1/10 that amount on Parkinson's disease, even though it affects a similar number of Americans. If we increase the amount of research we devote to Parkinson's disease tenfold, we'll get better treatments, and more important, better treatments, and we'll get better ways of preventing the disease. You need to share your story, and you're the most effective advocates. The people who changed the course of HIV, the people who changed the course of polio in the 1950s with the March of Dimes, the people who changed the course of drunk driving in the United States were all people who were most directly affected by the disease. They refused to be silent. They refused to be silent. They made their voices heard. They changed the course of polio. They changed the course of HIV. They changed the course of drunk driving. They're changing the course of breast cancer. We need to change the course of Parkinson's disease. The third element of the pact, C, is for care. We need to care for everyone affected by Parkinson's disease. 40% of Americans with Parkinson's disease who have Medicare, 40% of Medicare beneficiaries who are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease do not see a neurologist of any kind, not a Parkinson's specialist, not a neurologist of any kind within 4 years of diagnosis. And those that don't are more likely to fracture their hip, more likely to be placed in a skilled nursing facility, and more likely to die. We need to ensure that anyone, anywhere can access care for Parkinson's disease. And while we have about a dozen Parkinson's specialists in Rochester, there's many fewer in Syracuse. And telemedicine, using video conferencing like we're using right now to deliver the care to people, regardless of who they are or where they live, is a powerful tool. In the setting of the COVID pandemic, Medicare for the first time decided they would pay for care for Parkinson's disease in any condition to Medicare beneficiaries when it was delivered into their home, regardless of where people live. Before the pandemic, Medicare did not only pay for care provided to clinical settings like hospitals and clinics, and only in health professional shortage areas. Now, in the setting of the pandemic, anyone in the United States can get care from any specialist in their home without driving or without having to worry about exposure to COVID. We should ensure that these temporary changes are made permanent so that anyone, anywhere can receive the care that they need, regardless of who they are or where they live. Finally, for those with the disease, we need more effective treatments. T is the last part of the PACT, P-A-C-T. The most effective treatment for Parkinson's disease medical treatment is levodopa. It's over 50 years old. We've had no major therapeutic breakthroughs for Parkinson's disease this century. We had more major therapeutic breakthroughs, levodopa and deep brain stimulation, last century for Parkinson's disease than we had this century. We need to change the way we measure the disease, get objective measurements of the disease that can tell us in a shorter period of time whether these new biological therapies some target the underlying genetic causes and underlying causes of the disease are effective in a short period of time, so we can get these treatments more available to you now. That's the PACT, P-A-C-T, to end Parkinson's disease. Obviously, this book was the product of three of my great colleagues. Todd Scher is this Chief Executive Officer of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, who, when he was a doctoral or a postdoctoral student 20 years ago, identified that chronic exposure to pesticides results in Parkinson's disease in animal models. So he and his colleagues at the University of Pittsburgh, Emory University, demonstrated were among the first to provide very robust evidence that chronic exposure to pesticides can likely lead to Parkinson's disease. The second colleague is Dr. Michael Oken. Many of you might know him as the medical director for the Parkinson's Foundation. He's answered thousands, if not millions, of questions related to Parkinson's disease over the years. He's the chair of neurology at the University of Florida and a pioneer in deep brain stimulation. And finally is Dr. Bastian Bloem, or Bas as we call him. Bas lives in the Netherlands. He's a professor at Radboud University, Nijmegen. He and his colleagues have developed a multidisciplinary care model called ParkinsonNet that's highly effective for improving the care that people with Parkinson's disease receive. It is the largest integrated care program for Parkinson's disease, the only one of its kind throughout the world. It's been exported to Luxembourg, it's been exported to Norway, and it's been exported to many parts of the United States, including in Southern California. So we have three outstanding collaborators who share their stories and experiences in making this book, one, accessible to you. You heard me read an excerpt, so it's not highly technical, and it's rigorous. We have over 800 references and lots of tables and graphs and pictures in the book so that you can see pictures. Let's get your picture. That just, for example, shows the increasing rates of death due to Parkinson's disease. Now, this is a lot of my colleagues at the University of Rochester who've worked really, really hard and given themselves tirelessly to this effort. Lots of people shared their stories. The book has, I think, over 35 stories of individuals affected with Parkinson's disease, veterans, farmers, industrial workers, the scientists, the advocates who've all dedicated their lives to changing the course of this disease. And the book is available for purchase. All the proceeds for all the authors are being devoted to efforts to end Parkinson's disease. All the authors are donating all their proceeds to efforts to end Parkinson's disease. So you can purchase the book right now while you're listening to this thing on, you can purchase it right on Amazon. This is where you go to purchase the book. You can purchase it on Amazon. It's $17.89. You just click here and you can add it to your cart and buy it now. if the $17.89 is too expensive for you, and I know it is for some people, you will email us at info@endingpd.org. info@endingpd.org, and we'll send you a free copy. If the cost is too much and you want a copy of the book, you'll email us info@endingpd.org. Be sure to include your mailing address, and we'll mail you a copy for free. No obligation at all. Once you've read the book, if you like the book, or even if you don't like the book, we would love you to review the book. Regardless of whether you buy it on Amazon or however you get the book, you check it out from the library. You can click here on ratings and leave a ratings on Amazon. You click on ratings, you click on write a customer review, and this is what you do. You give us 5 stars or 1 star, whatever you want it to do. You say, you write in a headline, an important book. Then you write, let's end PD now. And you click submit, and that's it. The more we get the word out about the book, the sooner we get policymakers' attention, the more funding we get, the sooner we adopt policies to prevent people from ever developing disease, and the more resources we get to developing more effective treatments for those with the disease. Let's just give you back here. 1 second here. So that's the website. If you have questions, or you can email us at info@endingpd.org. If you were affected by Endicott, or you think you had a different other environmental exposures, if you're a farmer and you develop Parkinson's, I would love to hear from you. Email us at info@endingpd.org. If you can't afford the book and you want a free copy, just email us at info@endingpd.org, and we will send it to you. It is upon us. It is upon us as a generation to stand and act up to prevent this largely man-made disease. If our generation fails to act, the next generation will see twice as number of people affected with Parkinson's disease. We know what many of the causes of Parkinson's disease are. Some are genetic, but many of them, if not most of them are environmental. We need to act to stop polluting ourselves. The response to any pandemic, whether it's COVID or a fire or Parkinson's, is first to prevent other people from being affected, to contain it. We contain COVID by physically distancing, by wearing masks and limiting our exposure. We contain a fire by shutting doors and by using water to encircle it. For Parkinson's, we need to stop fueling it. We need to stop using pesticides like paraquat. We need to clean up affected sites that are affected with chemicals like trichloroethylene, and bring about the end of Parkinson's disease. We adopt the model of HIV activists, silence equals death, and we say silence equals suffering, and we've had too much suffering for 1.1 million Americans with Parkinson's disease. We'll change the course of the disease and prevent subsequent generations from bearing the burden of this debilitating condition. Thank you very much.